After the Light Died, chapters 23 and 24, The Cost of Silence. Michael Rothsman saw the report of the death of Robert Nguyen and removed the man's paper file from a drawer. He set it on his desk, took out a red stamp, and after wetting it in ink, he stamped the word "canceled" on the paper over his photo. He then closed the file and put it into another drawer along with all the others who had the same treatment over the last few years. The quiet removal of problematic individuals began before the revolution itself. First as a necessary component of eliminating talented collaborators, then as a way of removing dissident humans with weaker spines about doing what needed to be done to get rid of the Combine's people. Those who flinch from bombings where there would be human casualties? Or those who insisted on treating wounded aliens, but now, after the last alien had been purged from Terra? I hadn't expected any softness these days. It's a shame he could have been useful in future propaganda programs. So much for having him as the spokesman for all future Terran colonial efforts, he thought with an annoyed snort. All the commercials, videos, documentaries, all of it had to be thrown into the dustbin of unused ideas. On the other hand, maybe his wife can be useful? The grieving widow who was now mourning the loss of her husband at the death of an alien menace. That could be compelling in its own right, Michael said to himself. Talking to himself was an old habit, one he picked up in childhood when Magnus left home to join the revolution. Ironically, for the Minister of Information, the habit was formed because whilst everyone listened to his elder brother and sister, nobody listened to him. Even though everybody now did, whether they knew it or not, the habit of hearing himself out remained. But that process had two stages to it, and once he worked out what sounded like a good idea, he reached for his bottle of bourbon and began to chug it down. Though neither his brother nor his sister nor most others engaged in this tradition, he did as their father had before them, as many fathers had done since Xerxes defeated Alexander and conquered Macedonia, spreading the tradition over most of Europa before being driven out by the Rheman Empire under Crassus centuries later. The alcohol burned going down, but long habit made it easy to bear, and once Michael was thoroughly drunk, he began to argue with himself out loud again. Should get the widow talking? Betcha she'll get a lot of ears, especially after the wars and all. Brief. But a good scare always gets 'em going? Yeah. Only once Michael was sure that the idea he had for the widow, a modified series of programs centered around colonization, as well as a xeno-domination series, all of which sounded as good drunk as they did sober, he was able to call it a day, wait for himself to sober up, and write up the proposal in formal language for Magnus to present to his council. All council members were appointed by their districts. All of those districts were run by people who Magnus appointed, and so on down it went. There was only one popularly chosen position on Terra, and that was of the advisors who had no legislative or legal authority whatsoever. They stood by the side of the district satrap and provided information on popular issues, feelings, and concerns, as well as what might allay those issues, and in return, they were the voice of the satrap to the people of the districts, ensuring that their voices were heard and relaying necessary information along the way. It wasn't uncommon for dissidents who were too talented to waste to simply be appointed to run a district, only to find out that nobody liked them anymore, and their former popularity went over to the advisor, thus forcing the satrap to request that the advisor to be appointed well away from themselves so they wouldn't be a political threat in the future, usually to a council that effectively rubber-stamped Magnus's policies, and their legal authority was limited by a small number of judges that Magnus has also appointed. For that reason, Michael was entirely sure his ideas would all be approved, because there was one exception to the rule about nobody listening to him, and that rule was that Con Magnus Rothsman always did. When Susan learned of her husband's death, their son was sound asleep. The report was delivered by a member of the local militia who worked at the next farm over. He, not coincidentally, was one of the members of what in Robert's final days had called our death squad. Raoul was an eclectic sort. In his personal items on the colony ship storage, he'd paid extra to bring an entire tough box full of blue powder for which he'd offered no explanation. Not until they'd seen him after his farmhouse was built did they understand. Hair dye. He'd brought powdered blue hair dye. A supply large enough to last him years. What an odd man, she thought as she listened in a detached, otherly sense. It was as if she was watching him deliver the news, his voice vanishing into a sort of blah, blah, blah noise where she knew he was speaking, but she understood no words. All time seemed to slow down, and all the minute details of the moment except his words embedded themselves into her soul. His hat is dusty and damaged. He should get that fixed. Why did he dye his hair blue? He missed a spot when he was shaving. He must have rushed out to answer the call. I'll bet most of the militia volunteers were there. Good. Someone who knew him should have been there. Is something burning? Did I leave the stove on? Those stupid things have the worst auto shutoffs. He handed her a handkerchief, and it was only then that she noticed that she was crying, feeling the tears run down her cheeks as her heart tore in two. The salty water fell in slow motion. The tears struck the smooth surface of the floor with an audible patter, almost like those of a child's first tentative steps. Tap, tap, tap. Soft as they were, though, she heard them better than his spoken words, and it was only the act of dabbing her eyes that let her hear her neighbor's words. What? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Could you tell me again? Susan asked as the baby woke up and began to cry. As Raoul spoke, she lost track of his words. Her inner world spun out again as she thought of their son. He'll never know his father. They'll never have firsts together. They'll never embrace. And Robert will have missed every bit of his life. She had to ask Raoul to explain himself several more times before, when she held her son to her breast and gained a measure of quiet, she understood everything about Robert's final moments as relayed by the initial investigation. And when she knew it all, she looked Raoul square in the eye and said, "That's some bullshit." The day the Vecran Combine sent their notice to humanity stating, "We are coming to collect on your debts. You will pay in treasure or you will pay in blood. The choice is yours," Magnus had only one thing to say. "You believe you're coming to collect a debt, but I tell you that you're coming to pay one." The scientists aboard the monitoring station, once used to oppress the Terran population it was supposed to elevate, had made a great many breakthroughs in technology over the years, all of which was being incorporated into modern ship designs, while older models were being refitted far out of sensor range. But no sooner had that brief exchange passed than the Khan had another decision to make. With almost all their neighbors siding with the Combine, there was only one way to get at their enemy, and it was a bridge nobody thought he would cross. One thing and only one thing held him back from giving the order right then and there, a face he recognized right away. "Admiral Tehran, or are you an ambassador now?" Magnus asked when the holographic display appeared in front of his desk. The admiral of the invading force of that mockery of a nation, a people of divinely ordained debt collection, it seemed, had some semblance of a reputation with the Terran fleet, most notably in that he ordered the release of Terran civilian prisoners. Though well received in most quarters, Magnus thought the cancellation of the contract between themselves and the Combine had a role in the decision. Still, he remained civil and relaxed before the long-necked, slender blue alien. "I am still an admiral, but I serve as an adjunct to our embassy on matters pertaining to Absolutia. In that capacity, and with the authority of our government, I offer you a simple choice, a service, if you will." Magnus raised his right eyebrow. "Go on." "The Vecran Combine has many enemies. If you wish to make war on them, my people are willing to act as diplomatic proxies to those enemies of your enemies." We will help turn them into a united front against the Combine. In this way you can batter down the shield of their neighbors and strike them directly. You may have your revenge, Terran, and end that threat forever." Magnus narrowed his eyes. His hands went from relaxed to forming tense fists. "Why would you do this for us? Are we not enemies? You're going to pay us, of course, and in the aftermath of the war, I hope you will give us some diplomatic considerations." Admiral Tehran let the statement hang in the air between them across the thousands of light years, and Magnus let his mind wander through all the possibilities that lay ahead. Xenos aren't to be trusted, but it is a good idea to have a handful of useful allies. I don't need to love them to use them. And when we don't need them anymore, they can be just as dead tomorrow as if they were killed today. Magnus inclined his head. "I can agree to that. I'll set a committee to dickering over the price, but are you sure you can turn other governments against the Combine so easily?" Magnus asked. "The hate you bear for them runs deeper and wider than you know, Terran. All it will take is a single spark, and their whole empire will erupt in flames of retribution." Admiral Tehran answered with the kind of calm serenity that men only had about them when they were entirely sure that they were correct. It didn't mean he couldn't be wrong, but if he was, it was going to be a mighty shock. "If you do this by the time I have our renewed fleet in position, you will be very well paid, alien," Magnus promised, and the long-necked creature bowed his head in the same way. "It will be done, Terran," Tehran promised and closed the connection himself. Only after the connection ended did Magnus realize he didn't ask how long that would be. Which means he either already knows where our fleet is and when it will be in place, or it means he doesn't care how long he has because he is so sure he can succeed almost overnight. He took a slow, deep breath in through his nose, and then back out again. "Damn it to hell. Wondering which it is, that'll leave me up all night long. Fuck." The Khan furrowed his brow and rubbed it as he felt the headache coming on as fast as the anxious sweat that came with it. "At least I don't have to worry the same way my sister does, but sometimes I think it would be nice to be in Michael's shoes rather than mine." Magnus thought, and left his office to clear his head with a long walk. High Admiral Lucretia van Rothsman held her back straight and kept her eyes front when she stepped onto the flagship of Absolutia. Named Zeus's Wrath, the starship was the largest ever constructed. It held more power than humanity was even thought possible a few centuries ago, and according to Terra's finest scientists, in 10 or 20 years it would be obsolete, or at least outdated, compared to what they would be building then. But for now it was the best, and as she looked down the long, shining halls of her new command vessel, she couldn't imagine anything better. The info panels responded to every touch. The voice activation and interaction was clearer and cleaner than ever. It was a long tradition of Terran captains to tour the entire ship when they first took command, but in this case, what was once a process that took an hour or two now took her 3 days to complete, since she insisted on every room, every station, every cargo hold. And when she stepped onto the bridge, she truly felt it then to be hers. Her slender hand caressed the armrest of her chair. It was a sleek black metal, a fireproof metamaterial that was self-repairing in the event it was damaged. The seating was a bright red hexagonal rubbery material meant for comfort in the long hours that would be spent sleeping while on shift. The screen that would project her view of the stars was large enough that her first thought was, "I wonder if I can put games on it," before she brushed the silly thought aside, unspoken to any of her escorting officers. Normally, she would have run the entire war effort from far behind the lines, leaving junior captains to handle the small details and providing them only general orders and priorities to follow. But for this? For the war of retribution against the Vecran Combine? I'm coming for you motherfuckers in person, she said under her breath as she took her rightful seat just as the others took their posts around her. Ma'am? Her first officer asked when he overheard a fragment of her words. Nothing, she said and glanced toward her chief navigator. Engage. And the ship leapt into the void.